I used to believe my boss was just strict, demanding, cold, obsessed with discipline. That's what I told myself in the beginning, because admitting the truth would have meant accepting something much worse. When I started that job, I was grateful, truly grateful. The salary was good, the position was stable, and in a city where stability felt like a luxury, that mattered. Most of the women in our department were just like me, married, divorced, raising children, trying to survive. And he noticed everything. He knew who had a mortgage, who depended on their paycheck the most, whose husband worked in a conservative field, who couldn't afford to lose their job for even a month. At first, it didn't feel threatening. It felt personal. He remembered birthdays, asked about families, commented on things we never remembered telling him. I thought he was just attentive. I was wrong. The meetings started quietly, one by one, always private, always behind closed doors. No witnesses, no records. He never touched me, not once. And somehow that made it harder to explain the fear. He would sit across from me, relaxed, scrolling through his phone like nothing mattered. Then he'd look up and smile. "How's your husband doing lately? I heard rent prices went up again. Jobs like this are difficult to replace, you know." He said it calmly, almost kindly, but every sentence landed the same way. "I know your life. I control your income. Be careful." I convinced myself I was imagining it, that maybe I was too sensitive, too anxious, too eager to keep my job, until the day I heard someone crying in the restroom. She was one of the strongest women I knew, confident, professional, always composed. Her hands were shaking. "He called me in again," she said. That was all. She didn't explain. She didn't have to. That's when it clicked. We weren't being managed. We were being isolated. Each of us was pulled into that office separately. Different words, same message. He mentioned families, he mentioned money, he mentioned reputation. One woman was reminded that her performance review was flexible. Another was warned that rumors could travel fast. Someone else was told their husband might not appreciate misunderstandings. Nothing explicit, nothing you could quote. Just enough to keep us silent. He made sure we never compared notes. Meetings were staggered. Schedules changed. Fear works best when it's private. I started losing sleep. I replayed his voice in my head, that calm tone, that smile that never reached his eyes. And then I realized something terrifying. He wasn't threatening us. He was studying us, every reaction, every hesitation, every nervous laugh. He learned exactly how much pressure each of us could take, and how little resistance we would offer. The worst part, we kept showing up, every day, because fear doesn't make you run, fear makes you comply. Until the morning he called me in again, same office, same chair, same smile. But this time he leaned forward, and he said something different, something slower, something deliberate. "You know," he said, "your husband would be very surprised to hear some of the things people say about you here." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about control anymore. This was about destruction. And he had no idea he had just chosen the wrong woman. I went back to my desk like nothing had happened. I answered emails. I smiled at coworkers. I pretended my hands weren't shaking. But something inside me had already shifted. Because once a threat is spoken out loud, even quietly, you can't unhear it. That day, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. I noticed how often he watched us instead of working, how his door was always slightly open, how he timed his meetings so no one ever crossed paths in the hallway. It wasn't random. It was planned. I began remembering things I had brushed off before. The way he asked the same questions to different women, the same phrases, the same calm tone, almost like a script. A few days later, I stayed late. Most of the office was empty. The lights were dim. The air felt heavy. One of my coworkers was still there. She looked exhausted. We didn't talk at first, just worked in silence. Then, without looking at me, she said, "He told me if I didn't cooperate, my contract wouldn't be renewed." I froze. That was the first time someone said it clearly, not hinted, not implied, said. I asked her what he meant by cooperate. She swallowed hard. "He said my husband would misunderstand things if certain emails ever came out." Emails she never sent. Emails he claimed existed. That's when I realized how deep this went. He didn't need proof. He just needed fear. The next day, another woman pulled me aside. She asked quietly, "Did he ask about your family too?" I nodded. Her face went pale. That was the moment the isolation broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. We started talking in fragments, in whispers, in safe corners. And what we discovered was worse than any of us imagined. He had a version of each of us, a weakness, a pressure point. One woman had a sick child. Another was waiting on a promotion. Someone else had a past relationship she didn't want exposed. He tailored the threat to the person. Perfectly. And then we noticed something else. He reused lines, word for word. The same sentences appeared in different stories, the same timing, the same pauses. It wasn't emotional. It was mechanical. That's when the fear changed shape. It turned into something colder, anger. We began documenting everything. Dates, times, exact words. We wrote things down immediately after meetings. We saved emails, calendar invites, messages that felt off. Individually, it still looked like nothing. Together, it formed a pattern, a clear one. The scariest part wasn't what he did. It was how confident he was that we would never connect the dots, because he believed silence was permanent. Then he made another mistake. He called a group meeting, all of us. In one room, he smiled like always, relaxed, in control. He talked about performance, about loyalty, about trust. And then he said something he had said to all of us privately. The same sentence, out loud. The room went silent. For the first time, his words didn't land the way he expected, because now we recognized them. We looked at each other. Just for a second, but it was enough. He noticed. I saw it in his eyes, that tiny flicker of uncertainty. After the meeting, he called me in again. He tried to sound casual. He mentioned my husband, my salary, my future. But something was different. He was repeating himself. That's when I understood. He didn't know what we knew, and he was scared of losing control. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I listened. And when he finished, I said one sentence. "Everything you just said has been documented." He stared at me, not angry, not yet, just confused. That was the moment power shifted, not completely, but enough. Enough for him to realize this wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. And enough for us to know we weren't alone. I didn't confront him that day. I walked out of his office the same way I always did. Straight posture, polite smile, quiet compliance. But something inside me had shifted. Fear was still there, but it wasn't alone anymore. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to survive him. I was thinking about how he survived for so long. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, because I was alert. I replayed every meeting, every sentence he ever said, every casual comment that had felt too precise to be accidental. And I noticed something I had missed before. He never invented anything. He only repeated things that were already floating around. Half-truths, office gossip, small details we had shared with someone else somewhere else long ago. He wasn't powerful. He was informed. So the next morning, I started paying attention, not to him, to us. I noticed how often he walked past our desks without saying a word, how he lingered near conversations without joining them, how his assistant always seemed to know who had requested time off and why. Information moved through that office like air, invisible, everywhere, and he was breathing it in. I also noticed something else. He avoided groups. He was confident one-on-one, but stiff in meetings. Uncomfortable when women spoke over each other, when questions came too fast, when control wasn't clean and quiet. That's when I understood his real weakness. He needed isolation, so I stopped being isolated. It started small. Lunches together, bathroom breaks that lasted a little longer, eye contact that said more than words ever could. I didn't accuse. I didn't warn. I didn't dramatize. I asked questions. Has he ever mentioned your family? Does he bring up money with you too? Does his tone ever feel off? The answers came carefully at first, then faster, then all at once. Different stories, same pattern. The silence he had built began to crack. And something interesting happened. The more we talked, the smaller he seemed. Not weaker, smaller, like a shadow that only exists in the dark. We started documenting. Dates, phrases, exact wording, nothing emotional, nothing exaggerated. Just facts, and once you turn fear into facts, it changes shape. He called me in again a week later. I could tell he expected the same reaction. He leaned back, crossed his arms, smiled. But this time I didn't look down. He mentioned my husband again, my reputation, my future in the company. I let him finish. Then I said something he wasn't prepared for. "That's interesting," I said. "You used almost the same wording with 3 other women this month." His smile froze, just for a second. But that second was everything. I didn't threaten him. I didn't accuse him. I simply let him know he was no longer alone in the room. The meeting ended quickly, too quickly. After that, the calls stopped. Not just for me, for all of us. He still walked the halls, still smiled, still acted untouchable. But something was gone. The certainty. Because control only works when no one compares notes. And once we did, he had nothing left but a reputation he could no longer protect. I didn't win in the dramatic sense. There was no public apology, no explosive confrontation. But I reclaimed something far more important: my voice. And here's the truth I wish someone had told me sooner. The most dangerous people don't raise their voices. They whisper. They isolate. They rely on your silence to feel powerful. And the moment you stop carrying it alone, they disappear. People often ask what happened to him. They expect a dramatic ending. A scandal, a firing, a headline. That's how movies teach us to recognize justice. But real life doesn't work like that. Real power doesn't explode. It erodes. Weeks passed, then months. He was still there, still employed, still technically important. But no one went into his office alone anymore. Meetings suddenly included extra people. Emails started getting copied to supervisors. Conversations became shorter, colder, careful, he noticed. Of course he did. Powerful people always notice when the air changes. He tried to regain control. Jokes that didn't land, comments that felt forced, authority that sounded rehearsed. But once fear leaves the room, it never comes back the same. What surprised me most wasn't him. It was us. We changed without announcing it, without permission, without even agreeing on it out loud. We spoke differently, stood differently, interrupted when something felt wrong, and something unexpected happened. Other people started watching him too, not because we told them to, because confidence is contagious. When one person stops shrinking, it gives others permission to stop as well. The company never made a statement. They didn't need to. His influence simply faded. He stopped being invited into decisions, stopped being consulted, stopped being relevant. The man who once controlled the room now sat quietly, taking notes. I sometimes caught him looking at me, not with anger, not with threat, with confusion, as if he couldn't understand when exactly he lost. But I knew. He lost the moment we started telling the truth to each other. That's the part no one talks about. Abuse doesn't survive transparency. Manipulation doesn't survive connection. Control doesn't survive witnesses. I left that job a year later, not because I was pushed out, because I had outgrown the version of myself that accepted silence as safety. On my last day, I walked past his office. The door was open. He looked up. For a second, I wondered if he would say something. He didn't, and that was the final confirmation. He no longer had access to me. Here's what I want you to understand if this story feels familiar. You don't need to be brave all at once. You don't need proof immediately. You don't need to fight. You need connection, one honest conversation, one shared realization, one moment where you realize you're not imagining it. Predators don't hunt the strong. They hunt the isolated. And the most radical thing you can do is stop being alone. If you're watching this and thinking, that sounds exactly like my boss, or my coworker, or my teacher, or someone who smiles too calmly while crossing lines, trust that instinct. Your body notices danger before your mind finds words for it. Talk to someone. Write things down. Pay attention to patterns. And remember this: power doesn't come from authority, it comes from silence. And silence is optional. The moment you speak, even quietly, the balance shifts. You don't have to destroy them, you just have to stop protecting them. And when you do, they fade. Not with a bang, but with the soft sound of control slipping through their fingers.